Welcome back, guys, to episode 12 of Candid Chats with CNC. We are super excited for this episode. We're going to be talking about religion stuff today. But before we dive into that, Chris, what have you done since our last episode?
What have I done? Work has gotten really busy. I mentioned that in the last episode, but last week was a lot. Picking back up on stuff again, we're getting ready for our annual convention in January. So there's a lot of pre-work that's getting done there. This past weekend, did a whole lot of nothing, and it was really nice. And Rachel is joining us today, and I've mentioned in the past she lives in the same building as me, so usually her and I have different plans and stuff on the weekends, but she was out of town in Minnesota for work, and Stanley, who was on previously, was also out of town. He went to the beach with his family and then went back to Columbus and stuff. So did a whole lot of nothing. A whole lot of nothing.
Could have done something.
Well, I went to the mall and picked up a couple things, went shopping and stuff. So I felt successful there. But it was nice to just chill and relax and stuff. My mom and I planned out, she's coming out and visiting me over Labor Day.
Beautiful.
So we plan that out, have that set to go and everything. So that's exciting. So haven't done much.
Labor Day is going to be here before we know it. That's going to be weird.
Yeah.
I still can't get used to the fact that it's August.
I know, it's almost September. That's crazy.
Yeah. I took my last and final trip of the summer. Never thought I would be actually kind of excited to say that. I went to Pittsburgh this past weekend with my family because my sister moved out there and started a new job and pretty much relocated her entire life. So we got to see where she's living. We got to eat some really good food, got to explore Pittsburgh. So it was fun to go to a new city, but I've literally been living out of my suitcase since I went and saw Chris in May. I kid you not, I keep repacking and it's really annoying. So I'm really excited this week. I'm going to go through all the stuff I brought home from school, go through all my home stuff, make a donate pile, a trash pile. So I'm excited to just clean out everything, kind of put some things away, hopefully secure a job this week.
Yeah.
So yeah, now it's I'm back fully for a while, hopefully. So now it's just well, I guess I should do some things. I started working out today. I haven't done that since
I got a notification on my watch.
yeah. I haven't done
Colleen has finished a workout. And I was wow.
I did it a little bit in June, but with traveling so much, I was what's the point if I knew it was going to make me mad to work out a little bit here, go on a trip, work out a little bit here. I know it's still good for you, but I officially started an 8-week program today. So
that's exciting.
Back on the grind.
Yeah, that's exciting. Well, I guess let's give a little pretense of who we're going to be talking with and how we know them. So I'm also sorry, this headphone is driving me absolutely insane, and I don't know why it's not sitting right here. First we have Josie Montenay. She and I became friends in 2018. So how many years has that been? 4? 3?
4? Yeah.
Something like that. We met at Ohio State soon after I transferred. And fun fact, we used to hate each other.
Yep.
We hated each other before we actually figured out who each other was and actually talked to each other for the first time. Just because we knew each other through FFA and different things like that. But yeah, and then we were wow, we both had a realization moment of I don't hate them as much as I thought I did.
Yes.
So then we have been best friends ever since. She is my best friend. I don't know what I would do without her. And she's the one who I was supposed to we talked about this in the last episode. I was supposed to be the officiant at her wedding, and that did not happen because of COVID. So fun story, full circle. Fun fact also, she's moving here next month.
Officially?
Yeah.
Yay!
So yeah, officially, but not officially. She's still waiting on some paperwork and stuff. But yes, she's moving here.
Exciting. That's been up in the air for a while. So
yeah. So she is moving here in a couple weeks.
Well, then I obviously met her through Chris and when I was going through my breakup and everything, I was at Ohio State all the time. So that's where I met Josie.
Yeah. And then Rachel, we've known Rachel for a very long time.
Yes.
Rachel and I we're talking, and we've been friends for a decade, which is
sounds right.
nuts. Which is nuts. Her and I became friends. So pretense. She went to our high school, Colleen and I's high school.
Yeah, and she literally lives like 5 minutes down the road from me.
Yeah, like her parents' house is 5 minutes from Colleen's.
Yeah.
And so her and I met originally. I knew who she was because she was involved in stuff with like my brother and everything. She's a year younger than my brother. And so I'd heard of her through that. I saw her at like the fair and stuff like that. But when I was a freshman in high school, I joined the boys soccer team and she was on the girls soccer team. And so we would practice together a lot. And so from there we became friends, and we've been friends ever since. And now she is my coworker. And went to high school together. Now she's my coworker, work at the same place. And she lives in my apartment complex here in Arlington. And we are moving in together once our leases are up in November.
Yeah, so exciting.
Yeah, so we've known both of these two amazing women for a very long time. And I'm really excited to hear what they have to say about religion. And I think, honestly, it's going to be one of our best episodes.
Yes, so I want to give some insight into why we chose these two people for this episode. This episode is one that Chris and I planned within like the first 2 weeks of us recording for the podcast, because we were really excited about it, but we wanted to pick two people that just made sense. So the reason we're having 4 people on this episode is because literally one of us is clear to the left, one of us is clear to the right, and then 2 are kind of right in the middle on both sides. So we have different perspectives from all over the place. We also all grew up in different realms when it comes to religion. So that's why we chose these people, because we wanted to have the full just here to here.
Yeah. And I think a lot of topics are going to be covered, a lot of areas, especially like Rachel and I were chatting today, and she was like, I'm going to ask this question, I'm going to ask this question, I'm going to talk about this, and I'm going to talk about this. And I was like, good. Like, yeah, this is a very open space where you can talk about whatever you want to talk about, and somebody's going to agree or disagree, and it's just going to kind of go back and forth. It's not going to be a debate, but it's just kind of a conversation, because all 4 of us are very much so learners in the aspect of we respect each other so much that if you say anything, like, I want to learn and know why you think that way, or that's a different perspective that I haven't heard. Or
yeah, we all 4 of us have very open mindsets.
So, well, let's get right into it. Yeah. So we will be joining with Josie and Rachel in a few moments. Well, everyone, we are back, and we are here with Josie and Rachel. So why don't the people already know who Colleen and I are? We talk all the time. So why don't you guys go ahead and introduce yourselves? Tell us a little bit about you. Josie, you're on the left side of my screen, so how about you go first?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Josie. I'm currently living in Columbus, Ohio. So I met Chris when we were both in college. We both were over in the Ag Communications program at Ohio State. I branched off a little, went down the public affairs route. I have a minor in religious studies from Ohio State, and I currently work in the government relations industry in Columbus. So it's a good time there. But that's how I know Chris, and obviously met Colleen through Chris, through our many, many college memories together. And then Rachel and I still think haven't met each other, but we have many a Zoom calls through Chris. So the inclusion of this team here is great. Yeah. I'm Rachel. I live in the same building as Chris, 16 floors up. So basically we're already roommates. I know Colleen and Chris because we went to high school together, and I don't fully remember what else Josie included in hers. So there's just a lot of knowing everyone at all points of our lives. And yeah, Josie and I mean, now that, oh shoot, can I say that you're moving here? I don't know if you said that or not.
Yeah,
we're thinking about it. She's considering.
I pretend.
She's
I mean,
moving.
I mean, I said it before you guys hopped on.
Okay. I was going to say, I don't want to spill anybody's beans, but once you're here, we can have all the fun. Exactly.
Yeah. All right, awesome. Thank you guys for introducing yourselves. I want to go ahead and just dive right in. So I want to start from the very beginning with how our religion experiences were growing up. So I will go ahead first, and then we can just go down the line. So my religious experience was very slim to none. I went to church with my parents on Easter and Christmas up until I was in high school. And then my first like big, I would say, religion experience was when I got really sick my sophomore year of high school. I didn't know what to do. I was in and out of the hospital. I had a bunch of stomach issues, and my dad handed me his Bible and said, "This has helped me through some times of my life. Maybe this will help you too." And I actually took the untraditional route and I read it from cover to cover, handed it back, and said, "This is weird. I don't know what to do with this. I'll think about it. I'll try praying, but I don't really know what to do with this." So that was my growing up experience. So Chris, if you want to go.
Yeah, so mine was very different from Colleen's. I started going to church when I was literally 6 days old. I was born on a Monday, went to church on Sunday, and have been going to church. Well, went to church every Sunday until I got to college, and then you're at college, so like that obviously doesn't happen all the time. And then, but I would go home a lot before transferring to Ohio State, and I would go to church a lot on Sundays then. And then I went to church like quite a bit, like with Ohio State, through Ohio State sometimes, and then sometimes when I go back home, I still go to church. But I definitely consider myself religious. We come from a Free Will Baptist family, and so it's completely different from like what a lot of people like view Baptists as in Southern Baptists. It's all too much to go into. But I have my religion experience and excursion and adventure has been interesting because I was someone that was very much so deep rooted within faith and religion, especially growing up. And then once you get into the real world and you're an adult, like you kind of have those realizations of like, it's okay to disagree with some of the things that your church is doing, what your church is saying.
Mhm.
You can have a little bit of different opinions. And so I think I don't talk a ton about religion in my everyday life. Rachel and I have had a lot of these conversations recently. And but I'm a person that fully believes in God, has like very deep in touch with my faith. And I mean, I pray every single night before bed, to the point where I was telling Rachel the other day, I can't fall asleep unless I pray, because it's just become such a normalcy to me that it just is a thing. And so that's kind of me in a roundabout way. But yeah, very much so deep rooted in my faith and religion, and have been so since I was born. So yeah. Josie, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. So I think my upbringing was probably most similar to Colleen's so far. So my mom grew up Catholic. Entire family was very devoted to their Catholic faith as far as the like just practitioner aspect of it. But didn't really continue that as we got older. My dad grew up Methodist, and so both of my parents are mostly believers, like kind of like believer adjacent and everything. So we did not grow up going to church. Kind of consistently went to a local Methodist church until I was maybe 4 or 5. So really no like salient memories from that. And then so I spent majority of my life being like, okay, familiar with the idea of God, knowing that my family was like vague believers, but we really didn't have those conversations in my household. So you didn't really talk about God, you didn't talk about politics, you didn't talk about anything like that in my household growing up. So kind of were completely devoid of those conversations for majority of my upbringing. Kind of through my middle school and then peaking through my high school career, I would consider myself, I went from being agnostic to really atheist, like a really, really hateful atheist for a majority of my high school career. I'm really not proud of like the way I interacted with those who were religious, particularly those who like identified as Christian when I was in high school. It was very much just like this I had this weird superiority complex. It's really embarrassing, but I'm like still trying to come to terms with that the older that I get, and I'm not proud of that, but kind of based off of that, I knew a lot about the Bible. So I mean, read it kind of similar to Colleen, like tip to stern, read the entire Bible through, was fairly knowledgeable as far as the actual like doctrine goes and what stories were in the Bible and where those things were coming from, and was very, very critical. I remember buying a boyfriend in high school Bible for Christmas. Bible, I say that sarcastically because it was the Holy Bible, the best goddamn version. And so basically it was this kind of long book picking apart the Christian faith and picking apart the Bible. That spun pretty drastically towards the senior year of my high school because of a couple different life circumstances that had happened, particularly related to mental health and some like kind of trauma that happened in there. So I had a very, very much like coming to Jesus moment, quite literally. And so in college, I was very involved in kind of miscellaneous Christian groups on campus, got kind of plugged into churches a lot more. And that was kind of my home base when I was in college. So spent a lot of my time during the week doing that. But then I found as I'm kind of maturing, older I get, I consider myself less of a Christian, more of a follower of Christ. I think I have a pretty in-depth knowledge of religion overall. And I'm relatively critical of religion, kind of from an overarching standpoint. But I find that I most resonate with like the Bible and that kind of Christian idea of God, but definitely like a follower of Christ, have a lot of issues with like organized religion in a lot of ways, very critical of those things. However, my faith is very, very important to me. Being a follower of Christ is very important to me. And kind of the older that I've gotten, because my journey in religion is relatively new in the grand scheme of things, continuing to kind of like unpack all of that and figuring out where I lie and what I believe. And I'm very grateful that none of it really comes from my parents, because didn't have that growing up. So it's been kind of cool to have that journey where I'm kind of like on a self-discovery and working through that path. But yeah, that's kind of what I'm coming into this with. And then the academic perspective from having like a part of my undergrad was focused on religious studies. So yeah.
Very cool. I think I most resonate with Josie's earlier. I just need to, I'm sorry, I don't want to get us off track. Is it Josie or Josie? I just don't want to mispronounce it the whole time.
It doesn't matter. It's Josephine, technically. I'm going to be honest. No one asked me about Josie or Josie until I was in like my senior year of high school. Then another girl came to our school that was Josie, and she cared. I don't care. Call me whatever.
Okay.
So, whatever rolls off your tongue easiest.
I've asked Chris more than once, and he's like, I don't know. I've never asked. And I was like, well, if I say it wrong, I'm going to feel bad.
No, I think it's technically Josie, which I only say because my parents kept the napkin that they were at when my mom was pregnant. They went to a restaurant and they were trying to figure out what they were going to name me. And there was a short period of time that my sweet mother decided that she should contemplate spelling Josie like J-O-Z.
Oh.
So that's the thing. I'm going to leave you with that. That's all I have.
That's fantastic. Amazing. 10 out of 10. Love that so much. But sorry, not to fully detract us from the conversation. But yeah, I would say that I resonate most with yours. Both sides of my parents were like Methodist growing up. So I was brought up until probably like the third grade, so 9-ish years old. And my daycare center was where our church was. So it was a pretty like intertwined piece. But then like once my little brother was born, it was sort of that slow, like, we don't have time for Sunday school. And then just like that slowdown of not really going anymore. And then eventually, like, you know, you just grow up out of the daycare system that they have and grandma starts watching you. And so when that happened, it sort of fully detached me from the church. And it was one of those things where like, growing up, I would have been like, yeah, I like in middle school and high school, I would have been like, yeah, like I'm religious because I was raised in a family that believed, but like me as a person didn't really. And I would say I'm more, I would say I'm not really religious, but more so spiritual now. But I've also like, I've had a couple of friends of different Christian and Christian adjacent faiths. And so different denominations and such. And so I've really enjoyed like getting to experience those things. But I just, as a person, I'm with Josie. I have big issues with organized religion and sort of the role that they have within our society and stuff like that. And so I've sort of been soured away as a whole from ever really wanting to participate on a larger scale within a church setting because I just don't jive with it. But I love, with that being said, I love having conversations with people about religion, especially like this, where we're all from kind of different backgrounds of within our faith walk and how we've gotten there and everything. So yeah, that's kind of my story. I'm probably, I don't really know about Colleen, but definitely between Chris and Josie, I'm definitely the least religious. But I do believe it's just not maybe necessarily in God, and more so of a Mother Nature is not really right either. But like, I think that there's something to be said about the spirituality of our earth and of people and our world. I just don't know if it's the one that comes from a Christian faith. So
that's actually what I was going to bring up next, because listening to all you guys, I realized I didn't say like what I believe in right now in this moment. I was baptized Lutheran. I do believe in some of the Lutheran things, but not most of them. And my parents both grew up extremely religious. I mean, they went to church every single Sunday, no matter what. But they did not carry that.
I went to church with your grandma.
Yeah.
And your grandpa. They went to church.
Yeah. So my parents just didn't carry it into their adulthood, and they did not push it at all onto me or my sister. It was very much a do what you want with it. Kind of like in the sense of Josie, of like find your own path with it. But for me, I am very much a spiritual person. Like I would say, yeah, I'm with Rachel, probably a little bit farther than you. When I do pray, I pray to my ancestors and I pray to my spirit guides. I do a lot of stuff with crystals. I wouldn't say I'm like a hippy dippy thing, because I think there's a very fine line with it. But yeah, I definitely lean more on the spiritual side. I do believe that there is a God. I just don't, like it's just like, okay, yeah. I mean, it would make sense. But for me, the spiritual realm is definitely what makes more sense to me. I think the universe has a lot to say, but I also think that being a follower of Christ, there's a lot to listen to there as well. So it really just depends on what's best for you.
Yeah, I understand that. Also, Rachel brought up something that kind of got me thinking. I know that it's very common in Ohio, but I don't know about like the rest of the country. But like Rachel, you mentioned that your preschool that you went to was at a church. Mine was also at a church.
Me too.
Was either of yours, both of your? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So that's interesting thinking about that too, is I'm sure you were like everyone like in preschool, like your teachers were talked about God and like religion and different things like that. So it's very interesting also that we all went to a Christian-based preschool, and then a couple years later, when we were a little older, we started thinking about like our own paths.
Yeah, well, and it's really interesting that like it was introduced to us at such a young age like that. Like, what, you're 5 when you're in preschool? So like that's like to even like be able to like comprehend what they're even talking about, and then to like come to present day where like all 4 of us have kind of gone a different way.
Yeah. My preschool used to have this like prayer room that was like locked and set aside. Like you were not allowed to go into it even on Sundays. It was for like special ceremonies only. And I remember growing up that like frankly it wasn't because we were going to have this potentially godly experience or anything like that. It was just like, oh my gosh, we're 5 years old and we get to go in the cool room. This is going to be amazing. And like we did that, and I think back on like my preschool days, and I think it's very interesting how so pre-exposed we are, but how that can either help guide people. Like Christopher, like that probably helped you. Again, also, I think that family does play a big role in it and how active that is within your life. And then as you get older, you determining that path for yourself. But also like just how long that's been in all of our lives. It's crazy to think, because my daycare center starts at like, they probably don't do it anymore for like legality reasons and liability, but used to have like babies. Like I have a scar on my forehead from running into a pole when I was 2 years old at this daycare center. So like I spent like the entirety of my youth there. And so it's just interesting to think like how different it is now.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that like, go ahead, Christopher.
Oh, go ahead. I was just gonna say, I mean, I started at my preschool when I was 3. I was 3, 4, and then went to kindergarten at 5.
Mhm.
So yeah, but I mean, obviously, like, I probably had like a little bit of a one up on like some of the kids that like went that didn't necessarily go to church with like their families, because like I said, like, I mean, I'd been going to church for 3 years already at that point. So it was just kind of like instilled in me as like, we're not like, I wasn't going, it's not like you're in kindergarten, like, oh, you're going to school. Like you're 2 years old, you're going to Sunday school, and you're going to learn from my grandma was my Sunday school teacher. So my grandma was the one that was like teaching me about God and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, what were you going to say, Josie?
I was just gonna say, I think really looking at it from like a macro scale. Okay, now I'm on the sirens in the background. I don't know if you guys can hear that. But I think that like draws the conversation to like the macro scale of religion and where it resonates with people and the complexities of it. Because you see, I mean, I could probably tell you like 75%, I'm sure it's the same for you guys, of like my graduating class all did the same thing. They all went to the same place. And I think that's where you really look at religion and you look at the complexities of it as you grow into that and you grow into these miscellaneous faith structures, that you do not have like the capabilities to understand religion when you are that young. When you're that young, all it is there's people that are nice and you get to go play with your friends, and your parents got a chance to send you to daycare, and it's typically less expensive than like other daycare centers. That's a huge part of it. And I think, I mean, that could lead you to a whole conversation about like the church as a system and organization, right? And like what's that's there for and how do those begin. But I think that so often people have these like origin stories, right? No one ever talks about their like, not no one, but very seldom do people talk about their religious trauma coming from Tuesday school. And I think that there's a reason for that. And I think it's just because it's so hard. And like, you can't expect a child that's in Tuesday school like I was, they're not going to understand any of that. And so I always found it really interesting for that to be a breeding ground of religion. And I think that there is a lot of people who are more mature and like adults in the church who see like these services as being something where they're like, oh, they're like, you know, teaching the next generation about the Lord and everything. And I don't know if that's necessarily the case. I think there's a lot to be learned there about being a good person and like learning how to share and learning how to do those things like you should at any daycare. But I think that's just like a really interesting thing to like look at and unpack, is like, okay, so what is this the breeding ground for versus what does it actually like realistically turn into? I think it's interesting.
I think that's a good point. I've never thought about it like that. And like,
I
mean,
that's what I was thinking.
To be completely honest, I can't remember a freaking thing from preschool. Not a thing. But
yeah,
I don't know.
I remember my teacher had really long hair. She had real long hair and she would take it down every once in a while, and it was like Christmas in July.
I remember I had a blonde teacher. I think she was my second year. She's my 4th year. And no, she was my 3rd. I was 3 years old, and she left the year at like, that was her last year. And I was crying because I had a big crush on her. And my mom was like, it's okay, Miss Shannon will be fine. And I was like, no, Miss Shannon's leaving me.
The only thing I remember is we had like a dress up day one time, and I was throwing a fit and was like, Mom, I'm not dressing up. And I went to preschool, and my teacher was like, you're not going to be the only one here not in a costume. And I came home like covered in glitter, decked out, and I was like, Mommy, she made me dress up. I was so upset.
Colleen, a quick question. Did you go to the Methodist church in London?
No.
Or no, not the Presbyterian? Across from the fairgrounds?
No, I went to the Lutheran one.
Oh, okay, just kidding.
No.
Most of the people from like London, also part of Madison Plains, like that's a lot of us ended up going to the Presbyterian across from that. My mom also used to work there, and that is also where we talked previously, and like probably like our 2nd or 3rd episode, where kind of about how you meet these people like when you're so young, and then you like go through high school and like elementary and middle school, sometimes preschool with them. Like I was talking about how I have a person that I know that I graduated high school with, that we went to preschool together from age 3 to 12, and we were in the same homeroom every single year. And then now we don't talk, but yeah, we were just talking about that. But yeah. Colleen, I thought you were going to say something.
Well, I was thinking like back to religion stuff. Like, I think that like college, and it definitely like right now after college is where like a lot of people really like hone in on what they believe, and that's usually what they ride on for the rest of their lives. So like, yeah, like what we were talking about, I think it's really interesting that it's like introduced in preschool, but yet you kind of ride this roller coaster up until you're 20, 21, 22, and then you figure out that like, no, this is what I believe. But then you also have that group of people that like are 50 and find God then. So it's just very interesting how like there's so many different paths that you can take with this.
Yeah. I also think that like our generation as a whole has a much different like viewpoint on church and their walk with the Lord. Chris and I have talked many times about this, but I am not a fan, as I already said, about organized religion. I am a big fan of like people being their own churches. Like you are a house of God as a person. And so I think and I'm saying this based on, you know, my interactions with religious friends and such, but I feel like a lot of people our age that are religious are pretty firmly sort of in that category of they're like, you know, I don't agree a lot of the time with brick and mortars of churches anymore, but the way that I want to live, I'm going to live the way that I view Jesus and God and that kind of stuff. And I think that says a lot to our generation, because like, I just don't think that like our parents' generation and such have that kind of viewpoint. Like they grew up very much in the sense of like, you go to church your whole life and like you do the church activities and you show up on Sunday and like you pray and I just don't think that our generation views it like that. I think obviously we're just so much more connected than any other generation with online platforms and social media and stuff like that. But I do think that like also, I think it says something about the way that like religion is going to look 50 years from now comparatively to where we are. Like I think that you're going to see a church that is more accepting and potentially more well attended, because again, like for me, it's more of the organized aspect and the things that I think are really negative and frankly oppressive about, at least I should say religions as a whole, because it's in everyone and not just Christianity. And so I think that those things will hopefully have sort of become the minority of the voices when it comes to Christianity and religions as a whole in 50 years versus now, because I think that that's part of what keeps people away. I can say for myself, it's sort of what has kept me away from wanting to get deeper into my spiritual walk in that direction, because I have my beliefs and and the things that I believe and the people that I believe deserve the world. I'm not going to change that just because I'm going to a brick and mortar. I'd rather be a house of God myself and be able to know that like God's love and grace is within me for having that. And so I think it'll be really interesting to see how that changes over the next, like, again, 50 years, because that gives a lot of our parents and stuff, they'll probably be, let's be honest, they'll be gone by then. Not to get morbid about it, but it'll just be a whole new generation of people who will be leading our churches and leading the road in spirituality and religion. And so I'm excited and interested to see how that changes as we like go forward.
Yeah, I feel like oh my God, I feel like right now it's really interesting. We're seeing this kind of division happening even with younger generations. And so I'm going to speak specifically to the Christian church because it's my experience. But I think that it kind of goes across the board for most religions, where you have a lot of people who it's not the idea of God in whatever form that looks like that's the issue. It's the idea of the people within the church. And I think that that's so valid. I mean, speaking from my own experience, like my husband and I had to like walk out of a church service on Easter Sunday because of stuff that was being said and some other stuff going on. And so we stood up in the middle of church and we left. And so, but we also go to a church here in Columbus. We were visiting that church. We go to a church here in Columbus that has the most wonderful people. And it's so nice because it's like, I think for our parents' generation, like what you were speaking to, that was their source of community. And so your friends were the people you went to church with. And I think that now we're entering in this generation that's so interconnected that the church has to step up, because community is not going to be the only reason that people need to be there anymore. And it's not going to be like, oh, well, I really don't believe what they're saying, but you know, my best friend goes here and we have our socials on Fridays and we'll go to Bible study where we're really just going to chit chat and like have pizza. And I think the church is losing that aspect where there's so many other outlets for people to find that now, that they have to step up and they have to realize their own flaws in their indoctrination. Or even, I think that there's this movement happening now where, I don't know, you look at even Christianity and how many different versions of Christianity there is, which if that overall doesn't speak to the fact that there is so much more fluidity that happens within that religion than people realize, I don't know what does. One of my favorite sermons I've ever listened to was the pastor was going like, there's some people who are Amish that think you can use rubber tires, and there's some people that think you can use metal tires. They're both right. And so the thing is, it's like, I think where I see Christianity moving to is people sitting down, and if you have an earnest conversation with the Lord and you work on your own heart and your own relationship in that aspect, then you need to find your body of believers accordingly if that's something that you feel drawn to do and everything. So we're no longer siloed in this way where it's like, oh, well, I go to this town and this is the only church, so I have to go there. There's so many options now. There's so many different things. And so my like biggest hope and prayer for like Christianity as a whole, as we like enter in the next couple of decades, is that the ones that aren't good and people are going to finally, especially I believe in our generation to be the ones that step up, are going to be burnt out. And hopefully we see this new generation that's not just Christians, they're followers of Christ and they identify as followers of Christ. I mean, the term Christians in the Bible was only used in a derogatory manner. And so that's a really interesting thing where like this idea of like Christianity, it's like, you shouldn't aim just to be a Christian, you should aim to be a follower of Christ. And what's that going to look like as opposed to this brick and mortar organization of a church that's going to indoctrinate you and has been influenced by politics forever and all of these different things? And how are you going to navigate those waters? So I don't know. I think that you're 100% right. And I think it's super interesting.
Yeah, I'm with you. It's so interesting that you bring up the like community aspect of it, because quarantine, work from home, pandemic, whatever you want to call it. It's been so hard to be here. And, until Chris was here, I was here alone. Now, granted, I came home to my parents' house a decent amount because, being alone is not fun. And I was privileged enough that I was able to do that. And the drive was short and everything. But I remember I told my mom, I was like, I'm just so alone and lonely and I don't know what to do. And I remember when I first moved to DC, I was like, I don't know how to make new friends as an adult, which, that's a whole other conversation. But she was like, you should go to church. You'll find, go to church and you'll find friends. And she kept reiterating it throughout quarantine. And I was always like, it's not for me. Like, that's not what I want to do. But I think that that's so true what you said, Josie. It just speaks to the generational difference of my mom hasn't been to church in a hot minute. And she still was like, that's where you go to find a community. And it's like, but if I, like you said, for me as a generation, I'm like, but if I don't align with that, why would I go to it? Like, I have a friend who's a Mormon Latter-day Saints, the Church of Latter-day Saints, my apologies. And she would ask me if I wanted to go. And I only went because I liked going with her. Like, I enjoyed going to their Christmas social event where I could talk out and hang out with her, but like I wasn't going to start going by myself. Like I wasn't going to go without her. And so I think the social aspect of it, like you said, is going to have to, I think you're right. I think we're going to see a big change in the way that they do it, because they're going to see that, like, if I can't go with a friend because I don't have anything to do on a Sunday, and I know that I'm not going to have, like, I'm doing this because I have fun with my friend in college a couple weekends, but like, I'm not going to, now that I'm an adult in a new city, I'm not going to join a church just because I am struggling to find a community when it's not something that I jive with as an individual. So,
yeah. Well, with you bringing up COVID, that was something that I was thinking about, because we've always had this, like there's a sense of community. We all go because our parents go, like that's what we do. And then COVID happened. And I think now it's branching off into this whole other community where it became so much more of a choice. It wasn't, I feel like with our parents' generation, it was something that was kind of, that's what they did. And it was more kind of forced upon, where our generation is like, no, I don't have to do that. I choose to do that. And especially with COVID, there was a lot of churches that had Zooms and stuff, but there was a lot that couldn't do anything, especially like out here in, rural country, Ohio. They don't have the internet and the means to be able to do stuff through Zoom. So then it became, I don't have to have this community. I can still be a good Christian and a good follower of Christ because I'm choosing to be. So I think we're having that divide of, well, now I don't even need church because of COVID. So that's something that's also, I think, really interesting.
Yeah, I think that is interesting. And also, like, for the community aspect also, So my parents, well, yeah, both my parents, especially my mom, she did like when she was younger, she was the type that was like, my best friends go to my church and everything. But my situation was completely different from that because about 75% of my church growing up was age 65, 70 plus. And so therefore, and that also like speaks to like different religions. And that's like, I mean, for Free Will Baptist, you usually do see more of a Kentucky, Tennessee influence. And a lot of them are older white people, being honest. And so it was I never really thought about it until like I got older, because I had never experienced a church other than that, besides going to like my dad's parents, my other set of grandparents' church, which was Methodist, but it was literally the exact same thing of everyone's 65 plus, but there's only like 8 people that go to that church. Until I went to Ohio State and I went to a church service that Josie was involved in the church community that she was involved in. And you can definitely tell, like we've touched on that, but you can definitely tell that there is a wave of new kinds of church. Like, I mean, in Ohio, you hear about like Rock City, H2O, and these different types of communities. And I think that at Ohio State, Josie could talk more about this, but like at Ohio State, a lot of those people were finding their communities and their friends in college in those. And so it was a culture shock to me because I was not used to anything like that. And I think that I'm kind of struggling now to know and to realize I'm never going to find a church that I used to go to when I was younger. But do I want to? Like, I mean, I would like to like have like more of a sense of community of people that are my age, instead of my brother and I being the only two that are younger than the age of 45. And so, yeah, it's interesting. It's very interesting to think about it like that too.
Well, that made me think about my grandparents, the ones that you went to church with. They literally went to every single church in like a 50-mile radius of London, Ohio. Like Springfield, Columbus, they hit all of them. And they could not find a church that aligned with their views 110%. Like they wanted a church that like they preached everything that they believed, and they could not find one. So they ended up having their own service together at their house on Sundays. And I think that's like cute, but like kind of funny because it's like you couldn't find one within all of those places.
Yeah. But I think that also speaks to what Rachel said. So then it kind of like influences me to be my own house of God within myself. I'm figuring out what I believe in by myself. I'm 8.5 hours, 500 miles away from my family, and I'm 500 miles away from my home church. And so now I'm navigating life by myself. And so I think that especially having conversations like this, it also like kind of, not only does it open your eyes and like kind of learn, like you learn from other people, but also you're kind of finding out more about yourself of what do I want to improve on? Am I missing anything? This is something that I want to like change in the future kind of thing. And I think that especially some of the conversations that Rachel and I have had within the last couple of weeks, it's been kind of eye-opening to know, like, I mean, I definitely consider myself a follower of Christ. Consider myself a Christian because that's how I was raised and that's how I navigate myself. But also, it's just like, I don't know, it's just different. It's interesting. It's like a interesting topic to like think about and stuff, because you don't really, because I mean, I like at first when I was in college, I was like, I'm not being a good Christian. I'm not being a good follower of Christ because I'm not going to church every Sunday. But then I hit a point where I was like, I don't have to, because I have my own relationship with God. I know where that stands. I know how I feel towards that. I know how I feel about others. And so of course I want to go to church more, but I don't think that I need to go every single Sunday to be able to have a relationship with God.
Well, and I think it's something that is like a very personal thing, because it's one of those things where like you can always have the mindset of I could always be doing more. I could always be going to church more. I could always be praying more. I could always be having more conversations with God. Like I could always be going through the Bible more. Like you have to find your sweet spot.
So I have like a question on this as like someone who, again, isn't super deep into it. I'm curious to know if you guys feel or see that as things that you as a person would feel self-guided in if it didn't feel like it was coming from a brick and mortar. Because from my perspective, as we're talking about it, it feels like the kind of things that church leaders and organized religion want you to feel that way. But if you are having a one-on-one relationship with God, would God make you feel that way? So I guess I'm just curious on your perspective on like that statement, and if you guys feel like brick and mortar organized religion sort of is stagnant in that way of keeping you wanting to feel like you do need them to be like they're like the middleman in your process, when in reality you might not need that middleman, and you might feel more secure and closer in your relationship with God if you didn't have people making you feel that way. Because that's, to me, that's what this sounds like, is that like it's less that, you know, I don't know if God, again, I'm not God and anything like that, but it feels like to me like the basis of Christianity, because obviously that's a little more specifically what we're speaking to as this religious discussion is that it's about love and your relationship with him, and it feels like if you're doing your best and you're having your best relationship with God, like I guess obviously we can always improve as human beings, but like it feels like the church is the one that really is more so making you feel like you could be doing more, when in reality would God say the same thing to you if you were having that conversation?
I think maybe I can speak to that, because I think I'm probably like between Chris and I have spent less time in the brick and mortar, because I guess even saying Grant and I found our church that we really like in the midst of COVID. And so like we just watched the virtual. They were most of the churches and people that we know continued services as per usual with COVID. As we know, like the laws in Ohio, they were allowed to. And so majority of churches in Ohio just kind of went on business as usual. The church that we now virtually attend, and of course we've gone to a couple times in person, we've pretty much been fully virtual on it. And so I want to say, like, while I really like the teachings at that church and why they've resonated with us, and we've been very, like, I cannot speak highly enough about the experience that we've had there, even just from aligning with like kind of what we believe and everything, we don't necessarily have a relationship with that church, if that makes sense. And then other than that, I mean, my husband grew up in a very, very, very different kind of like childhood than I did when it comes to religion. And so I won't speak to that necessarily, but what I found is that Christianity has this weird back and forth, right? Because you have the church, which makes you feel it's like a compulsion to try to encourage you in these things, exactly like you were saying. And it's like, and I think that's where religion gets taken too far sometimes. I mean, if you want, I feel like everyone I know that's like having a like quarter life religious like crisis over everything, it's because they've been gaslit by a church for the last 10 years of their life, you know? And I think that that's so common, and it's incredibly tragic, I think. And so this is me transitioning away from like this like academia standpoint on religion and more going towards like my personal belief system, which I want to make abundantly clear. I think everyone should and does believe differently, and that's completely okay. But it's like, I see we have this Lord who I feel invites us in and wants that relationship. And I find in my own life that the more time I spend with the Lord, the better I feel, and the better my mental health is, and the better all of these things are, completely devoid of any interaction from the church. In fact, I would say until we found this church, a lot of my experience with organized religion was damaging to my relationship with Christ, because it puts you in that guilt mindset, right? And I think that that religious guilt and that religious trauma is so prevalent when you run in these circles. And then that's in so many different places that hits, whether you're looking at like purity culture, whether you're looking at all of these different things that can be so deeply damaging to people, because I think you have these religious leaders who, although they probably started in the same place of a lot of the other like followers of Christ are in the world, where they're just like, oh, like the Lord loves us and wants a relationship. And I do think that that's where it stems from, is that they truly believe that, and they truly believe that like the Lord loves you and the Lord wants a relationship with you, and blah, blah, blah. Of course, a lot of people who take it to the extreme, there's a lot of asterisks and caveats associated with that are incredibly problematic. So I think there's this core belief from most people in the Christian church that God wants relationship with you and God wants that back and forth with you and everything. Unfortunately, where that gets taken to is I have to guilt you and make you feel like you are less of a person, like you are undeserving, like you are unworthy, like you are nothing of all of these things. One of my biggest pet peeves is that it is Christian doctrine to say like we are undeserving of the fact that all of our sins were covered by the death of Christ, right? And I think that that in of itself is not necessarily like problematic from the standpoint of it's like, okay, well, you're saying that people have problems and to be completely wiped clean with no guilt or anything of those problems, which is what the actual doctrine is. Okay, I get that. The minute you have a religious leader that's then taking you into this space that's saying you are undeserving, you are unworthy, you don't deserve this, you should be like quite literally on your hands and knees begging God for forgiveness and like confessing to what a horrible person you are and doing all of those things. How wildly problematic is that? And so I think that that's this kind of back and forth in this world of Christianity where you have church leaders that make it into a compulsion that quite frankly has nothing to do with the Bible. It's just they become so caught in this headspace. And that's at odds, in my opinion, very much at odds and opposite of this God who wants a relationship with you and wants you to be in community with other believers, whatever that looks like. I think that is taken like way too finite sometimes. Like you have to be in a Bible study. Me being in community with other believers is Chris and I on a Friday night watching a movie and talking about like whatever's going on, and me being like, if you can just pray for me with that, like that's really hard. And I think that that's the whole thing. So I think that the Christian church has become so at odds with itself, particularly with leaders and what the actual doctrine is. So yeah, I think that Christianity is this really, really, really tight balance between wanting to encourage you to do those things, because like to have a relationship there, and that in of itself was already finely balanced, right? But then you have the fact that the Bible's been twisted 6 ways to Sunday, and it's become like just gaslighting and problematic. So my hot take.
It's a good one. No, I would agree with a lot of what Josie said. For me, it makes me feel better, and it makes me feel like a better person, and it makes me feel better mentally, knowing that also like if I'm having a really, really rough day, which happens a decent amount of times, then I'm able to go and talk to God and lay it all out on the line of this is what's going on. I need your strength. I need guidance. And so like that helps me. I would say that probably when I was younger, I felt more towards I need to be doing these things, but that's also because like growing up, like you're taught like God is a forgiving God and he loves you, but also like he wants you to fear him because there are so many things, X amount of things that you need to be doing correctly in your life to be able to do that and to live right by him. And so, but then once I got older and then kind of knowing, okay, this is what I believe and this is what I think, then it kind of retransformed into I'm doing this for me and not because I'm told to do it. If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So
I think really briefly too, what I want to, sorry to like interject again, what I think is really interesting is that word God-fearing, where we have this God who like wants us and how often that's used. And I think it's really interesting looking at the Bible from an academic perspective. And so something that is so prevalent within these like worlds that we run in with biblical interpretation is that the language it was the Bible was translated from its core are so much more robust than what we can put words to, right? And so you look at the word God-fearing, and it's like everyone's heard like love is translated 4 different ways in the Bible, right? And so we already know the precedent is that we're like what we consider like love in every sense. The original language and the original translation of the Bible, there's 4 different meanings for the word love. Same thing goes with God-fearing, and that's where I think we have this like fire and brimstone preaching that happens now. It's like God wants you to be scared. And that's not, because really like what the original translation was, now that we know more and we've learned more and we're evolving, is that like we understand like God fearing and like to fear the Lord, it's like more of like a reverence. and that's closer to what the interpretation should have been. And I think that that term is so interesting, the way that it's, I think, twisted now, just like Chris talked about, like in this like fire and brimstone, like you need to be scared of the Lord way. So I just thought that was interesting, like that specific language, because I think that that draws like a huge point of contention in those circles.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's something I want to add to what you said earlier about the doctrine, and this is something that I like growing up. I think this is the way that I saw the church, and I think that kind of how my grandparents did a little bit too. And I think this is definitely like, you know, what Catholics definitely try to follow as well, is that I can sin all week long, but if I go to church on Sunday and I pray and I ask for forgiveness and I ask for his love, then I have a clean slate. And that's something that like I've never been able to back. But I also think that that's another way that the doctrine is twisted. I think that's another twist of the whole gambit.
Yeah, that's, I can, for me, like as a Free Will Baptist, that is not what we believe.
Yeah.
We, so in a Baptist sense, as a just straight up regular Baptist, they believe that once you're saved, more so in a roundabout way. Where like us, like as Free Will Baptists, like you need to ask God to forgive you every time that you sin, like throughout those times, because you need to live correctly in the way that he wants you to, kind of thing, and be on the straight and narrow path of make sure that you're doing all of these things right. So like for me, like do I sin? Yes. Do I ask for forgiveness? Yes. But do I still believe that even though I'm not going on a strict narrow path of you need to do this, and this, even though I know that I'm not doing some of those things, do I still think that I'm still on a good path within my religion and I feel confident within myself and I'm still close with faith and I have a good religion with God? Yes. So
I think that kind of leads me, Chris, that I think bringing up the idea of like the once saved, always saved versus the rolling basis, right? I think that comes down to this really core question that I think I would pose to you guys, which would be like this idea of like life after death. I don't know about y'all, but I'm terrified of the whole kind of concept. And I find that a lot of times that's religion is kind of used to ease that. And I think that that's huge, whatever your religion is, right? And so I don't know, I guess it's kind of like what's everyone's take on just like life after death and a higher power or not a higher power, or like how religion or not having religion helps you navigate those waters.
We hate to abruptly stop, guys, but we feel like this is a good place to take a pause. I know that we have covered so many topics, but we are not even close to done. So stay tuned for next week's episode, because we are going to have a 2-part series for the religion topic and continue on the chats with Josie and Rachel.
Yeah. And of course, as always, you guys can watch and listen. You can watch on YouTube, listen on Podbean, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Safari, anywhere that you listen to your podcasts, we're there. So thanks for joining us, and we will see you next week. Peace and blessings.
Peace and blessings.